Hi everybody. In today's video, I'm going to go through how to change your damper oil. So the first thing you want to do is to remember which shim goes on which shock. Because on my car, the front and rear shims are different and you don't want to get them mixed up. So what I've done is to put the corresponding shim with the shock and the screw together. So that way I won't get them mixed up. So what you want to do next is to remove the spring from the damper. So what you do is you pull the spring back and then remove the bottom part. So now we're going to pour out the shock oil. I like to use a metal tray like this, just bought from a hardware store, and to put a few tissues inside. The tissues should be enough to capture all the fluid, and if not, you can always put more tissues to absorb it. So now we empty the shock oil. Inside you'll notice that there's a bladder. Sometimes it will stick inside the cap, sometimes not. If not, you can just take it off and pour out the old dirty oil. Push the piston up and down a few times until you feel like most of the shock oil has come out, and then you can push the piston about halfway down and then set it aside somewhere for it to drain out. You can also use cotton buds to wipe out the remaining oil inside the damper. Just try to make sure you don't leave any cotton bud fibers inside when you do this. So now your dampers should be nice and clean like this. I mean, there's a bit of oil left, but if you're really pedantic, you can get rid of it, but I just tend to call this good enough and move on to the next stage. So now we're going to fill the shock oil back in. So first you need your shock oil, and over here are damper pumps. You can see there are some holes. It's just like this. So all it is a vacuum chamber. So you fill it in until it's about to reach the top or thereabouts. This part can be quite rough because we're not at the final stage yet. So then you move it up and down. And then you can see it drops down a bit, and then you just add a bit more oil until it's up to the top, or close to the top, doesn't have to be exactly. And then you want to move the piston up and down to get rid of the air bubbles. And as you do this, you'll feel the damping force become stronger, and that's the result of the air bubbles going away and thus the oil viscosity getting higher. Okay, so after you've done that, the next stage is to use the pump to get rid of the remaining air bubbles in the oil. So we put our lid on and pump away. As the vacuum is started, there will be air bubbles coming up. When you see most of the bubbles have come up to the top, then you can move on to the next stage. The reason why we want to go through all this trouble to remove air bubbles is because the more air bubbles are in the dampers, the less damping there will be. And if the air bubbles are inconsistent, if one damper has more air bubbles than the other, the damping will be inconsistent between the four corners, and you want them to be as even as possible. So now let's see how effective our pumping has been. So you want to slowly release the pressure, because if you do it really quick, all the oil spills out from the dampers and makes a mess. Gently let it out and then open. The way you check then is like before. You take out your dampers and then move it up and down like before, just to check if there's any air bubbles. So this has, I don't know if you see it, but this still has some left. You want, if possible, to have absolutely no bubbles. Yeah, this is not very good. So pump up and down, up and down. Basically pump up and down until you feel it gets, the force gets stronger. Or the damping force gets stronger. And that's a good sign that it's getting there. And after you've done that, you just repeat the process of pumping just like before. So you pump it and see if the air bubbles have reduced. Okay, so now you want to replace the cap back on the top. So I've seen on the internet the various ways to do this. The way I'm about to show you seems to work the best for me, but you can go and look at some other videos to see how others do it, and you can experiment. So I like to take, and these are shocks for the X-Ray T4. Shocks for other cars might work a bit differently, so bear that in mind. Anyway, for me, I like to take my bladder and put that on first. So to make sure there's no air gets into the shock as you're doing this, what I do is I gently push the piston up to the top, making sure you don't get any air into the shock. And then take your bladder and then you kind of put it in from the side and slip it in, so making sure you don't get any air in there. And then I like to take a screwdriver or hex driver and push the middle and squeeze the oil out the side. And you push it until you feel the bladder is seated completely, and you push a bit on the sides as well. And you do this until you feel the bladder is sitting completely flat on the shock. And also, as I mentioned, you have to make sure that the shock is pushed all the way up to the top, because this is for setting zero rebound, which is what we like to use. Rebound is another topic altogether, but for the sake of this video, push your piston all the way up before you put the bladder on. So now the bladder is on, you need to screw the cap back on. And then twist it tight. Okay. If you've done this correctly, then you should see the piston will not bounce out. This is called zero rebound, as in the shock does not bounce back out. Okay, so that's number one way you check if it's done correctly. The second thing you check is, after you've made sure the cap is tight, move the piston up and down to feel if it's smooth. If the action is smooth, then it means you've done it correctly. If it feels a bit rough, or it feels like there's something stuck inside, that means there's still air bubbles, and that you need to go through the process of pumping out the air out of the oil again. Now all that's left to do is to put your spring back on your damper and put the bottom thingy back in. So that's it. That's your damper with your damper oil changed, ready to go. So hopefully this tutorial has been useful. If so, please like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. See you, bye.